Have you ever wondered how one average Galilean rural carpenter might change the course of human history? Under Roman rule during a turbulent time, Jesus Christ started a movement that shook the basis of a huge empire. He was not, however, a strong king, nor an army leader. He used only words, love, and sacrifice. What then made him the center of attention for a faith lasting more than 2,000 years? This story is behind enormous hardship, unquestioning faith, and miracles transforming the earth. Discover with us the life of Jesus from the stable in Bethlehem to the cross at Golgotha, and understand how he created history. Born during the remarkable Pax Romana, when the powerful Roman Empire was going through hitherto unheard-of stability and calm, Jesus Christ was. This epoch, from 27 BC to 180 AD, created the backdrop for one of the most potent stories in history. Under Roman rule, the Jewish population maintained their own religious and cultural identity in the small province of Judea. Roman authority and Jewish tradition interacted complexly to create the world in which Jesus was born. Even as the Romans allowed the Jews to pursue their beliefs and protect their culture, simmering tensions continued beneath the surface. Appointed by Rome as king of Judea, Herod the Great ruled with both terrible cruelty and enormous vision. He transformed Jerusalem with large-scale building undertakings, including the renovation of the Second Temple, into an utterly stunning monument. But under his leadership, he ruthlessly quelled any claimed challenges to his authority, including the infamous decision to kill all male infants in Bethlehem, following birth prophecies of a new king. Divided sharply among many political and theological factions, the Pharisees of this age stressed strict adherence to religious law and custom. Mostly hailing from wealthy backgrounds, the Sadducees exerted a significant influence on the temple order. Emphasizing spiritual purity, the Essenes lived apart in small communities. Among the ordinary people, there was growing hope for the promised Messiah, who would release them from alien oppression. Under Jesus' mission, Pontius Pilate was the Roman prefect of Judea. Regular conflicts with religious officials stemmed from his ignorance of Jewish customs and sensitivities under his control. Constant disagreement resulted from Pilate's pragmatic approach to maintaining order, often running opposed to Jewish religious views. The financial landscape was obviously different. Many regular people struggled with taxes, while local nobility and Roman residents celebrated riches. Farmers, fishermen, crafters, and those living modest lives, yet committed to religion, formed the backbone of civilization. Apart from being a religious hub, the temple in Jerusalem was a commercial center where traders and money changers ran out of exterior courts. The cultural surroundings were quite distinct. Greek ideas and Roman customs shaped cities. Conventional Jewish life ruled rural areas. Despite the extensive use of Greek in trade and government, the common language among the people was Aramaic. Religious writings and rites kept Hebrew as the holy language. Arriving along trade routes across the empire were travelers, ideas, and influences from all around. Greco-Roman civilization began in towns around Nazareth's birthplace, including Sepphoris. This cultural mixing created a unique environment in which many points of view interacted and sometimes collided. In the surrounding synagogues, men were learning the Torah, primarily focusing their education on religious lessons. Religious knowledge and cultural values were much shared, thanks in significant part to the oral tradition. Respected in society, rabbis and teachers traveled from village to town, sharing their expertise. Running through the political terrain were messianic expectations. Leaders of several movements arose, professing to be celestial deliverers. The complicated political and theological milieu would impact the reception of Jesus' teachings and his ultimate clash with governmental and ecclesiastical authorities. The Romans treated any indication of revolt ruthlessly, executing individuals who contradicted the conventional wisdom. This historical background helps one to see how Jesus' life and teachings both reflected and challenged the social, religious, and political structures of his time. His message of love, pardon, and spiritual regeneration found immense resonance among those living under these circumstances, but those who saw him as a challenge to the status quo opposed him. Born in Bethlehem more than 2,000 years ago, the life and lessons of Jesus Christ shaped Christianity. He was a Jewish preacher, spreading strong lessons on God's love and the advent of his kingdom while touring Judea and Galilee. Jesus attracted large numbers of people by teaching, using arresting parables, and performing miraculous healings, stressing love for all people regardless of position or background, compassion, and forgiveness. He questioned the traditional religious and societal mores of his day. His innovative message said that not only the privileged few, but everyone who would hear it with faith may enter God's kingdom. He taught us how to respect people and live our daily lives, therefore surpassing basic religious rites in what is truly worship. For his travels across his ministry, Jesus selected 12 disciples to carry his lessons. He imparted servant leadership to them, therefore proving that real genius comes from humility and service to others. These followers would later form the basis of the early Christian church. Concerned religious officials of the day were Jesus' growing influence and challenges to their power. His message was seen as radical and a challenge to the received wisdom, even if he advocated love and peace. Because of this opposition, his crucifixion would follow. His teachings on God's relentless love and compassion signaled a dramatic departure from the austere legalism of religious leaders. He showed this by his interactions with the dregs of society, the poor, sick, and rejected. Jesus showed especially immense pity for those society turned against. The work of Jesus would start a movement changing the ancient world. Although he broke accepted standards of a political or military leader, his supporters claimed he was the long-awaited Messiah expected in Jewish scripture. Arriving as a modest servant instead, Jesus emphasized spiritual growth above earthly power. Once the disciples of Jesus preached his atonement and message of hope, this new faith spread rapidly over the Roman Empire. Gathering around these concepts, early Christian communities laid the foundation of what would become Christianity. These societies defined radical love and concern for one another. God's plan for atonement, death, and resurrection to bring people together took the stage. For everyone who will believe, from different social or ethnic backgrounds, this offers everlasting life and atonement of sins. The message spans the social and cultural frontiers of the day. Lessons from Jesus have consequences far beyond simply religious ones. He spoke of the need to love one's enemies, forgive those who have insulted us, and treat people with decency and respect. These principles challenged prevailing cultural norms and inspire individuals even now. Jesus underlined the requirement of real faith above only religious compliance. According to true religion, he added, one leads a moral life in all fields, treats orphans and widows, and shows compassion to those in need. His courses covered both pragmatic and spiritual aspects of daily life. Eventually, the movement he started would affect all spheres of life, including art, literature, philosophy, and human rights. Later, his emphasis on human dignity and value would help to define the expansion of modern social justice campaigns and humanitarian beliefs. Since Jesus' teaching is global, it is always rather appealing. His teachings on love, pardon, justice, and hope still speak to people from many generations and cultures. His word has shown transforming power in many varied lives across millennia. These same teachings inspire millions of people looking for direction, meaning, and a relationship with God nowadays. Still, Jesus' revolutionary message that God's love transforms life and reaches all people is the foundation of Christian faith. It also keeps life challenging and evolving all around. Mostly working in Galilee, Jesus went among the common people, delivering profound parables and effecting miraculous healings. Emphasizing deep changes instead of rigorous religious doctrine, his style was quite intimate and friendly. Using compelling stories and object teachings learned from daily life, Jesus explained challenging spiritual truths for all. His comments about farmers sowing seeds, herders tending to livestock, and stores seeking priceless jewels spoke to his audience's daily existence. As Jesus traveled from town to town, he demonstrated God's love by compassionate healing acts. He made the lame walk, cleaned leprous patients, and restored sight to the blind. These miracles verified his lessons and showed God's sympathy for personal suffering. His teachings stressed the need for actual faith and good action above mere ceremonial attendance. According to him, true religion was about having a changed heart that naturally shows love for God and people, not about obeying rules. Jesus exhorted his followers to see their inner attitudes and reasons, rather than focusing solely on outward compliance with religious guidelines. From a real heart, he said, our treatment of others reveals real worship. Jesus underlined simple but strong spiritual ideals instead of complicated procedures or sacrifices. Love God entirely. Love your neighbor as yourself. Pardon those who hurt you, and show sorrow for anyone in need. Since his message offered hope for God's kingdom to be attainable to everyone who would receive it with naive trust, the common people genuinely related to it. Among those Christian societies, sometimes rejected, he welcomed tax collectors, sinners, and social misfits. How Jesus lived what he taught exposed the authenticity of his work. He was modest in wiping his followers' feet, kind in touching lepers, and even forgiving, even toward those who crucified him. By use of his parables, Jesus revealed profound truths about God's character and rule. He spoke of a kind Samaritan tending to a wounded stranger, a prodigal son welcomed home by a loving dad, and a helping shepherd looking for misplaced sheep. His lessons challenged, received knowledge by elevating the standing of women, children, and societal misfits. Treating everyone with dignity, he saw their inherent worth as beings created in God's image. Jesus stressed that real spiritual development starts in the heart and shows up in changed behavior. He said that outside of religious activities, only when they reflect real inner devotion to God will they have value. His message was revolutionary in that it underlined true contact with God over formal religion, grace over legalism, and sympathy over sacrifice. This approach put those who gave maintaining traditional institutions top priority in danger. His ministry was defined by accessibility, teaching in homes, farms, and along lake shores, rather than limiting himself to official religious settings. This illustrated how God's truth and presence transcended temples or specific locations. Today, the simplicity and depth of Jesus' teaching continually challenge and inspire. His emphasis on actual faith, pragmatic love, and heart transformation, which provide direction for an important spiritual life, remains applicable worldwide and across generations. Tensions were rising in Jerusalem because Jesus was becoming more popular and making bold challenges to religious authority. This was the start of the events that would lead to his death. Jewish leaders and Roman officials were violently protesting his criticism of corrupt religious practices and aggressive actions at the temple. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem's temple court, where he overturned the money changers' tables and drove out those who had transformed God's sanctuary of prayer into a marketplace, marked a pivotal moment. The amazing display against religious exploitation became a target for rival initiatives aiming against him. The move seemed to the temple officials as a direct challenge to their delicate balance of power with Roman authority. Unlike whitewashed graves, his public lectures routinely exposed the hypocrisy of religious leaders. Albeit on the outside, they were full of corruption inside. He called their disrespect for justice and devotion to appearances unacceptable. These meetings became more intense as Jesus' influence among the common people expanded. The ecclesiastical elite particularly found significant disturbance in Jesus' claims of divine power and growing acceptance among the common people. His lessons challenged their interpretation of the scriptures and their privileged role as go-betweens for God and the people. Long unopposed, their influence is under close public inspection now. Extremely wary of Jesus, the Roman leaders feared that his talk of God's kingdom may start a political revolution. Despite his spiritual, rather than political message, his widespread appeal posed a potential threat to Roman sovereignty. Their memory of earlier Jewish revolutions made them particularly sensitive to any movement drawing substantial numbers. As Passover neared Jerusalem, tensions in the city soared. Fearing both a loss of control and perhaps Roman participation, religious leaders began organizing to assassinate Jesus. They sought fraudulent testimony against him, even with a compromised court system, but they struggled to pinpoint credible allegations that would hold up under scrutiny. Among his 12 disciples, the treason of Judas Iscariot gave the opportunity his enemy had been seeking. Under his cover, Jesus went to pray with his friends in the Garden of Gethsemane, where they captured him. They chose this point specifically to prevent rushing over his followers. Following was a chain of rushed, illegal trials, first carried out before the Jewish Sanhedrin, and then before Pontius Pilate, the Roman emperor. Under public pressure, Pilate sentenced Jesus to death, even though he had no legal basis for punishment. The political wrangle revealed the complex link between Roman authority and religious leaders. Saving it for the worst offenders, they deliberately chose the harsh and embarrassing technique of execution: crossing. They beat Jesus. Made fun of him, and had him carry his cross across the street. His public execution discouraged anyone who would challenge the status quo. The status quo stayed exactly the same. All through his trials and crucifixion, Jesus maintained the same love and pardon he had advised, emphasizing in Christian faith a reaction to violence with compassion and forgiveness. He prayed for his executioners even on the cross, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." His death marked a dramatic change in the mounting hostility to his extreme ideas of love and spiritual development. The political and religious authorities felt they had silenced his outspoken voice and ended his march. They expected his supporters to scatter and his teachings to fade into oblivion, a fate common to many failed movements in the past. The circumstances of his death exposed the obvious clash between heavenly truth and human power systems. Though officials saw him as a threat to their authority, Jesus showed them that true power results from unselfish love rather than force. Maintaining his commitment to love and truth, his ready acceptance of death, would be a wonderful memorial to his supporters. First scattered in panic and doubt, his supporters seemed to have their dreams smashed. The disciples, who had expected Jesus to create an earthly kingdom, found it difficult to comprehend how their teacher could have survived crucifixion. This period of darkness and ambiguity severely damaged their faith. The struggle before Jesus' crucifixion revealed the enormous discrepancy between his message of God's kingdom and the approved political and religious systems of his day. His death exposed the ultimate cost of using compassion and truth to question dishonest power structures. Pilate's political compromise, the mob manipulation of the religious leaders, and the temporary desertion of the disciples all underlined many aspects of human nature, confronted with divine truth. But thanks to his resurrection, what seemed to be a total loss would soon turn out to be the central event of Christianity. The exact deeds meant to wipe out Jesus' movement would instead become the means by which his message would go over the earth, transforming countless lives over many generations. Jesus' death and resurrection became pivotal moments for his followers, fulfilling long-held Jewish predictions. These events fundamentally altered their understanding of his identity as the expected Messiah and launched a strong new religious movement meant for worldwide spread. Through their study of Hebrew books, his followers found many links between prophetic literature and Jesus' death and resurrection. Seen as direct fulfillment of predictions published centuries earlier were his death, the piercing of his hands and feet, the casting of lots for his clothing, and even his burial in a rich man's tomb. These connections strengthened their conviction that Jesus' life and death fit God's divine plan. Originally despondent at Jesus' death, the disciples converted upon seeing the rising Christ. Though his goal had changed, these meetings drastically changed their viewpoint of him and convinced them that Jesus was indeed the much-needed Messiah. Not so much by building an earthly kingdom with political or military force. He had conquered death itself. Early Christian movement proclamation largely depended on the resurrection. Declaring frankly that God had raised Jesus from the dead, the disciples demonstrated his divine identity and the truthfulness of his teachings, therefore defending Jesus. Strong opposition and persecution notwithstanding, this gospel soon spread over the Roman Empire. From scared concealment to strong declaration, the disciples' behavior changed to provide dramatic evidence of the accuracy of their convictions. From this view of events, Jesus' death assumed fresh relevance. Rather than as a loss, his supporters started to view his crucifixion as a sacrifice done as God's will for human atonement. His death was the last sacrifice satisfying what the ancient temple offerings had only hinted at. This information changed their viewpoint on their interaction with God and worship. Early Christians saw Jesus as the fulfillment of the prophecy of the suffering servant who would carry many sins of many, reported by Isaiah. His resurrection marked the beginning of a new chapter in God's relationship with mankind, as it allowed everyone to acquire atonement and fresh life. This point of view destroyed accepted distinctions between Jews and Gentiles, therefore creating a new civilization grounded on Christ's beliefs. These incidents fundamentally changed the perspective his supporters had of God's kingdom. They saw that the changing power of the gospel word will shape hearts and lives, one individual at a time, therefore transcending a quick political transition. Early churches could handle persecution with this awareness, yet they still hoped for complete victory. Apart from strengthening the faith of the disciples, The resurrection appearances gave them enormous courage to face persecution. Those who had fled following Jesus' arrest now boldly declared his message in front of death, prison, and threats. Verified by the truthfulness of their message and the reality of the resurrection, they were prepared to die martyrs. This new realization launched the accelerated spread of Christian groups across ethnic and cultural borders. Christ's death and the hope his resurrection offered as a proclamation of God's love would resonate among people from diverse backgrounds. Early churches developed into unique communities where unity in Christ transcended social, ethnic, and socioeconomic barriers. As the movement progressed and Jesus met and transformed Jewish expectations of the Messiah, believers became increasingly appreciative. Along with the triumphant king, whose achievement came from unselfish love rather than military might, they saw Jesus as the suffering servant. This paradoxical point of view challenged accepted knowledge about authority and leadership. Early Christian communities set themselves apart by their strong belief that Jesus' resurrection was not simply a historical event, but also a modern reality, continually altering individuals. Their lives counted for his anticipated return and the ultimate building of God's kingdom. Their daily conduct, attitudes, and priorities were molded by this hope. Understanding Jesus' death and resurrection dramatically altered religious viewpoints on atonement and personal relationships with God. It inspired a worldwide effort to spread this transforming word and planted hope that exceeded death. Early Christians got a commission to declare their importance to every country and saw themselves as witnesses to these events. Centuries later, and throughout numerous civilizations, these events still have resonance. For successive generations of Christians, Christian faith still derives from the knowledge of Jesus' death and resurrection as the fulfillment of prophecy and the road of salvation. From antiquity, this understanding has influenced social movements, literature, music, and art. Over 2 millennia, this message has had a transforming effect on countless lives. Social justice, poverty, marginalized care, education, healthcare, and human rights have inspired movements. People all over still derive hope and direction from the early disciples' perspective of these events as the fulfillment of prophecy and the inauguration of God's kingdom. Originally a Jewish persecutor of Christians, Paul had a deep conversion on the way to Damascus and became a major actor in expanding Christianity outside its Jewish foundations. His missionary activities basically helped define the early Christian movement and its expansion over the Roman Empire. Paul, a Roman citizen and highly educated Jewish scholar, carried particular qualifications to his missionary activities. Drawing on his knowledge of both Jewish literature and Greek-Roman society, he effectively presented the Christian message to many listeners. Paul's groundbreaking approach focused on teaching that belief in Jesus Christ, rather than adherence to Jewish law, would allow Gentiles, non-Jews, to access Christianity. This was a big adjustment from needing to convert to first becoming Jewish proselytes. Through his missionary travels around the Mediterranean, Paul established Christian communities in large cities. His urban evangelistic strategy established centers from which the faith could flourish in surrounding areas. Along with a great personal risk, these trips featured beatings, detention, and continuous resistance. His teachings concentrated on how atonement may be achieved by faith in Christ's death and resurrection, rather than on observance of Jewish customs, such as circumcision or food restrictions. This position sparked significant discussions on the relationship between Jewish law and Christian religion, as well as much controversy inside the early church. later incorporated in the New Testament. Paul's letters to numerous communities addressed theological and pragmatic issues faced by early Christian cultures. These volumes generated significant Christian concepts and guidance for church life that are still in use today. He argued from a global Christian perspective, free of social and racial constraints. Declared famously in Christ, neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, embodied a radical equality, challenging accepted societal institutions. By methods of logical argument and pastoral concern, Paul guided early Christians in knowing how to carry out their beliefs in many cultural circumstances. Viewed in line with Christian beliefs, he responded to questions about marriage, social events, religious rights, and moral behavior. His emphasis on grace instead of law was a fundamental theological shift. Paul preached that God's acceptance showed itself in Christ by faith, not via religious observances or moral achievements. Particularly in relation to this message, Gentiles felt excluded from Jewish legal norms. Paul's missionary effort established a cross-cultural ministry appropriate for the global spread of Christianity. He demonstrated how to transmit Christian truth in ways appropriate for a given society while still preserving its central message. Paul's founded cities became the main centers of Christian influence. His efforts in planning laid the foundation for the leadership and church building of the next generation. He selected local leaders and maintained relationships through letters and visits. His methods of instruction combined academic rigor with practical application. Paul spoke about theological concepts and how they may affect daily life. He gave conversion instructions on how their new religion should affect their relationships and behavior. Against opposition, Paul worked tirelessly to transform a small Jewish sect into a movement attracting individuals from many backgrounds. His publications set standards for theological ideas and missionary activity, currently guiding Christian service. The effectiveness of Paul's approach demonstrated how Christianity may adapt to numerous cultural environments while maintaining its fundamental message. His legacy lies in both his pragmatic, cross-cultural missionary approach and his theological contributions. Early Christian communities gathered generally in homes to create intimate fellowship groups, sharing meals, worship, and daily life together. A fast-growing movement that dispersed over the Roman Empire was built on these home churches. Combining individuals from different social levels, ethnic backgrounds, and cultural traditions, these early interactions were shockingly diversified. Rich and poor, Jews and Gentiles sat together as equals, dining and praying, a new activity in the hierarchical Roman society, as slaves and masters. Women held key leadership roles in these early communities, serving as prophets, instructors, and hostesses. For the period, this was revolutionary, because most religious and societal institutions limited women's participation. Early Christian writings name various women leaders, including Junia, Phoebe, and Priscilla. Their meetings revolved mostly around the shared meals, commonly known as the love feast or agape meal. Combining prayer with company, this custom celebrated Jesus' parting dinner with his disciples. These feasts honored Christ's death and resurrection by means of bread and wine shared among believers. Their vibrant participatory worship featured teaching, prayer, singing, and spontaneous prophecy. Unlike the formal temple worship of Judaism or pagan faiths, early Christian worship promoted the active participation of all members, advised to use their spiritual gifts. These individuals developed several customs and behaviors motivated by their local cultures. However, they maintained fundamental views about Jesus. Some groups maintained Jewish rituals, while others accepted more Gentile practices. hence producing different worship styles and community life. The home-based nature of these sessions fostered personal relationships and mutual encouragement. Members cared for orphans and widows, supported one another through trying circumstances, and shared resources. Many people connected to the Christian faith found immense captivation in this pragmatic show of love. Within these house churches, leadership grew organically, usually motivated more by spiritual development and service than by social status. Many times acting cooperatively, several leaders provided the community with pastoral care, organizational control, and education. The intimacy of house churches enabled spiritual growth and effective discipleship. New believers might watch and learn from seasoned Christians, seeing how religion was carried out in daily life in a family-like setting. These communities built networks of mutual support and communication, letter sharing, missionary travel, and relief to other churches in need, much as Paul's epistles did. Geographic distance aside, this dependency helped to maintain togetherness. Early Christians questioned traditional social mores by insisting on equality and inclusion. Among the other persons, society excluded, slaves, the poor, and social misfits supplied dignity and purpose for women. Many people were drawn to this radical social vision by its faith. Their meetings addressed times of instruction in Christian teaching, study of the scriptures, first Jewish texts, then apostolic writings, and a discussion of how to apply faith to daily life. This teaching element helped to produce and defend Christian doctrine. Prayer dominated their meetings as Christians intervened for the welfare of society, the spread of the gospel, and each other's needs. They also combined healing prayer with other charismatic talents. Among the challenges these early civilizations faced were government persecution, internal warfare over values and customs, and the need to maintain unity among diversity. Their determination to get beyond these challenges improved the flow of events. The idea of a home-based church allowed Christianity to flourish rapidly, free from formal institutions or expensive buildings. For various cultural environments and against persecution, it proved rather adaptable, as gatherings could easily relocate or divide into smaller groups. A turning point that underlined the widening divide between Judaism and Christianity came from the destruction of Jerusalem and her temple in 70 CE. This horrible event changed the courses of both religions since it occurred during the Jewish revolt against Roman rule. Driven by religious conflicts, heavy taxes, and dreams of autonomy, the Jewish uprising against Rome began in 66 CE. Many Jews believed this uprising would bring in the Messianic age, therefore freeing them from Roman control and restoring Jewish autonomy. Christian communities did, however, mainly refrain from endorsing the rebellion. Many Christians evacuated Jerusalem before it matched Jesus' prophecies on its fall from grace. This decision escalated already existing conflict, since their Jewish neighbors saw their non-participation as betrayal. The Roman response was really bad. Over a protracted siege, the Roman army under Titus broke through Jerusalem's walls. The following disaster was total. Titus torched and wrecked the Great Temple, the hub of millennia of Jewish activity. The wrecked city was home to a great number of slaves or dead. Both religions suffered much from this catastrophe. For Jews, the demolition of the temple removed the central location for their religious life. Without the temple, Judaism had to reimagine itself and focus now on Torah study, synagogue worship, and rabbinic leadership. These events were seen by Christians as divine vengeance and validation of Jesus' prophecies. The destruction of the temple accelerated the expansion of Christianity as a distinct, separate religion from its Jewish roots. Already concentrated on Christ instead of the temple, Christian worship continued undisturbed. The outcome was increasing hostility between Jews and Christians. Christians' perception of Jerusalem's death as retaliation for rejecting Jesus further strained relations. Jewish people increasingly felt that Christianity threatened their identity as they battled to survive and reconstruct. Various religious identities originally surfaced around this period. Judaism developed new kinds of worship and learning under rabbinic leadership to replace temple-based rites. Christianity stressed more and more its worldwide message and aim for non-Jews. Theological terrain evolved as every faith adapted to different conditions. Synagogues became more and more significant in Jewish life, while Christian churches developed with their own special rites and customs. The physical distance between these groupings helped explain religious variations. Jerusalem's fall touched off changes in Christian doctrine, considered confirming the new covenant in Christ and signaling the end of the old covenant. The demolition of the temple affected Christian literature and education for decades. The impact of the tragedy reached social and political spheres, as well as religious ones. Jewish groups endured increasing marginalization inside the Roman Empire, while Christianity gradually gained acceptance among Gentiles, at last designated as the official religion. These developments long-term changed interfaith relationships. As each tradition developed, increasingly distinct identities and readings of shared texts arose, and centuries of conflict and misinterpretation followed from the growing divide between Judaism and Christianity. Jerusalem's devastation brought trauma that changed the viewpoint of divine providence, as well as history for every faith. Jews preserved optimism for Jerusalem's restoration and the temple's rebuilding, while Christians grew more spiritualized in their readings of these promises. The event is still quite relevant historically. The Western Wall, the surviving monument of the temple, is Judaism's holiest place, while Christian pilgrims come to Jerusalem to connect with the beginnings of their faith, stressing the continuous importance of this ancient event. In ways still influencing Jewish-Christian relations today, this historical turning point affected religious thought, practice, and identity. Varied reactions to the fall of Jerusalem highlight the varied points of view on common historical events, therefore guiding civilizations in different routes. Written decades after Jesus' death, the Gospels gained a reputation as exceptional theological narratives, capturing the changing ideas and identities of the early Christian movement. These works evolved through oral traditions, kept and handed on inside Christian communities. The Gospel writers created historical biographies, in addition to theological readings of Jesus' life and work. Emphasizing many aspects of Jesus' identity and teachings, every writer addressed the specific needs and problems of their respective societies. Usually considered the first, Mark's Gospel was written circa 70 CE. Emphasizing Jesus' role as the suffering servant, its fast-paced, action-oriented narrative. The author presented Jesus as a strong but enigmatic person who revealed his actual identity by his deeds and teachings. Aimed at a predominantly Jewish Christian readership, Matthew's Gospel focused on Jesus as the realization of Jewish prophecies. Presenting Jesus as the expected Messiah and the new Moses providing heavenly instruction, the author gradually connected his life and teachings with Old Testament events. Luke's story emphasized Jesus' universal atonement message and his sympathy for the less fortunate, including women, the impoverished, and social misfits. This Gospel's sophisticated literary style and historical setting, which showed Christianity as appropriate for Greco-Roman civilization, appealed much to gentle readers. Later, John's Gospel presented a more philosophical and mystical perspective on Jesus, emphasizing his lifetime and relationship with God the Father. Its great theological reflection presented Jesus as the divine Word made flesh. Writing these Gospels required careful selection and arrangement of traditional materials. Early Christian preaching, first-hand testimony, and collections of Jesus' sayings were among the writer's sources, which they turned into compelling narratives. These publications caught the evolution of theological knowledge in Christian nations. As Christians battled questions about Jesus' identity and relevance, the Gospels provided authoritative interpretations that shaped Christian doctrine and practice. The range among the Gospel stories demonstrated the profundity of early Christian concepts. Though they agreed mainly with Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, every author added particular insights and emphasis that improved Christian knowledge. The Gospels also retained vital historical records on Jesus and his time. Written with religious objectives, they also provided perceptive analysis on Roman imperial control, Jewish customs, and first-century Palestinian life. These works grew in conjunction with Christian spread. As the faith evolved beyond its Jewish foundations, the Gospels helped clarify Jesus' relevance to many audiences all throughout the Roman Empire. Using these works to guide newly converted members turned into basic records for Christian communities. Reading them at worship meetings changed them. They provided the required instruments for understanding Jesus' life and applying his teachings to everyday problems. Creating bridges across Christian groups, writing, and distributing these publications helped them. Sharing gospel publications helps geographically scattered churches stay connected in practice and belief. Over ages, the Gospels affected Christian art, writings, and worship beyond their original surroundings. Their tales provided strong imagery and ideas that still inspire thought and faith. These texts provided authoritative tools for clarifying and defending the religion, while Christianity faced many challenges and conflicts. Their careful preservation and distribution ensured that Jesus' life story and teachings would be known to succeeding generations. Christianity's exponential spread over the Roman Empire showed remarkable resilience in the face of persecution and discrimination. The movement remains original as a faith group applying Roman architecture. The Roman Empire's extensive road and sea systems enabled Christian missionaries to go about. Travelers, business people, and military men who converted to Christianity transported their faith to other places, building churches in major cities. Early Christians suffered several types of persecution. Some emperors looked at them with distrust as they refrained from participating in royal cult worship. Sometimes local governments blamed Christians for social unrest and natural disasters, producing periodically strong waves. Against all these challenges, Christianity attracted believers from every social level. Many of the Greco-Roman people connected with its message of divine love, human dignity, and hope of resurrection. For bystanders especially, the Christian community's compassion for the sick and underprivileged was rather amazing. Urban areas became important locations of Christian spread. First, the movement grew in cities, where busy trade and diverse populations created opportunities for sharing of religion. From big cities, Christianity initially slowly made its way to rural areas. Christian groups developed effective systems of organization. Local churches kept in touch with letters, guest teachers, and material exchanges. While maintaining the oneness of belief, this network allowed for cultural flexibility. Christians were singled out, sometimes with unexpected results. Instead of suppressing Christians' faith and conviction, it occasionally inspired fresh conversions. This phenomenon was expressed in the well-known comment, "The blood of martyrs is the seed of the Church." Christians were special in their rejection of emperor worship and pagan rituals. This created tension with authorities, but it also formed a clear Christian identity, appealing to people seeking spiritual authenticity. The movement's emphasis on education helped it grow. Christians established methodical courses for recently converted persons and educational institutions. Maintaining its own message, this intellectual inheritance helped Christianity connect with Greco-Roman civilization. Translation efforts were quite important. By translating books and teachings into regional languages, Christians opened the faith to many. Christianity distinguishes itself from many mystery religions by this commitment to popular translating. Drawing educated Greeks and wealthy Romans, the Christian message broke societal barriers to treat women and slaves with dignity. This social diversity strengthened the cause by providing widespread public support and leadership as well. Christians developed various survival skills even under times of minimal legal protection. They met in homes, marked other believers with discreet symbols, and maintained low profiles during times of extreme persecution. The movement's adaptability turned into quite an important factor. While still upholding basic beliefs, Christian communities adapted to match local norms, generating forms of worship and community life appealing to many different kinds of people. Driven mostly by local persecution, Christians migrated and inadvertently introduced the faith to other countries. These displaced Christians established new communities, therefore turning exile into an opportunity for expansion. Christian kindness influenced many pagans during disasters and pandemics. Some Christians left towns during epidemics, while others stayed to tend to the sick and attracted respect and conversion. At last, Christianity was able to preserve its fundamental principles while being appropriate for several cultural environments. Its survival and spread in the face of great opposition was made possible by this equilibrium between flexibility and loyalty to fundamental ideals. The movement's spread transformed the Roman Empire from within, thereby aiding Constantine in validating Christianity. This incredible journey from persecuted minority to robust faith community reveals the endurance of religious movements driven by great conviction. Together, we have looked at significant benchmarks from the historical context of the Pax Romana, Jesus' birth, his changing teachings, and the confrontations up to his crucifixion. But what separates his story is the resurrection, a miracle turning point that irreversibly changed the course of history. This journey teaches us a very important lesson. If we are to bring about change, we must be ready to challenge what is wrong, even sometimes at great personal sacrifice. Jesus' life adequately shows how well love, trust, and sacrifice can surpass even death itself. Let me thus ask you this: how might we use this lesson in our own lives? Maybe it's forgiving someone, or even in challenging conditions, keeping your ideals. Let the story of Jesus not stay just a narrative. Let it inspire you toward a life of deeper significance. Should this video be of benefit to you, be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe to prevent missing forthcoming content. Share your opinions in the comments as well. Which part of Jesus' story best resonated with you? See you in the next video. Rook.
Do you love meaningful Bible stories? Top 7 Bible Stories channel will bring you inspiration and peace every day. Don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments section. Your sharing is the motivation for us to bring more stories. Top 7 Bible Stories. Good stories, beautiful meanings.